Okay. Hello and welcome to the DeepMed seminar, a history forum on Mediterranean science, strategy and environment hosted by the ERC-funded project DeepMed. Today we have Petros Kastrinakis talking about the Cretan city of Chania, or Chania. How is that pronounced?
Chania.
Yes. In the context of the, I was there, by the way, very beautiful city. So yeah, in the context of the shift from sail to steam, and Ada Ferraresi is going to introduce him. But first, I would like to announce, I think I can already announce that she just became review assistant editor for the, or editor to the review, no, assistant editor to the review section book of the Technology and Culture Journal, which is a very nice position that is going to allow her to, I think, help the journal become more international in the books they are reviewing.
It's very ambitious of you.
Well, that's what they hired you for. Also, not only books written in English. So if you have books or know of people who have books, send them their way and she will maybe get them reviewed. Okay, Yara, all yours.
Well, thank you, Lena, for this unnecessary introduction. Okay, so yes, Petros Kastrinakis is a postdoc researcher in history. He holds a PhD from the Department of History and Archaeology of the University of Crete in Rethymno, with the dissertation An Ottoman Port in the 19th Century, the case of Chania. He received his master's degree in Ottoman history from the same department in collaboration with the Institute for Mediterranean Studies in Rethymno. And his PhD research was part of an ERC starting grant called CLIT, Seafaring Lives in Transition, always, again, at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies, which was later funded by the State Scholarship Foundation. He's received several scholarships, has been associated on research projects, again, at the Institute and at other universities such as Stanford Universities, where he collaborated on the project mapping the Ottoman Epirus. He's currently working as a postdoc at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies on a project on illegal trade in the 19th century Eastern Mediterranean. His main interests are the study of ports and islands, late Ottoman history, maritime history, urban history, and public health history. And so just briefly, I wanted to qualify this. So I know the topic today is a little different from what we've been doing thus far at DeepMed, but my idea was sort of that we can link our discussions on science and technology to a stronger understanding of the social fabric of the Mediterranean in late modernity, both to see where the actors that, who the actors that made up this space in this time were and how they were affected by the scientific and technological developments we've been investigating, but also perhaps to address some more historiographical questions about the Mediterranean as an analytical category of history. And so the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us, Petros. Go on.
Hello, everyone. Again, let me start my presentation again. Okay. 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 So, hello, everyone again. I'm Petros Kastrinakis. I would like to warmly thank the organizers and all members of the DeepMed project for their kind invitation and the opportunity to share my research with you today. As Ada said, I will present parts of my research that are from my dissertation, an Ottoman port in the 19th century, the case of Chania. It was part of a research project. The name was CLIT, Seafaring Lives in Transition, Mediterranean Maritime Labor and Shipping and the Challenge of Globalization. at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies in Crete, in Rethymno. And actually, my plan is to present parts of the findings of my PhD, and also to introduce you a bit, introduce a part of my postdoctoral work, as the two are closely connected. So these are some of the books published to start with in recent years in Ottoman studies, focusing on port cities. The volumes on the left and on the right examine the transformation in major port cities during the 19th century, period when trade, shipping went undergoing significant changes, leaving a strong imprint on the urban landscape. In contrast, the book in the middle focuses on a smaller port, the smaller port of Mersin, is a smaller port in Turkey nowadays, over several centuries. Of course, there are many other works, but I just show you this because actually they inspire me, and actually I try to see how I can take the case study of Chania and try actually to consider how the economic and social history of a small port can also be meaningfully explored. Although it appears that the port city of Chania had characteristics similar to other port cities, similar policies were imposed on it. These were implemented at a slower pace or to a lesser extent because the factors are many, and we can discuss them later, but this is what I have seen so far. My research aims to stress the role of the port of Chania for the economy of the island and for the economy of the Mediterranean in the 19th century, and to highlight the role of the communities in the maritime activities of the island by giving prominence to the role of Cretan Muslims as sailors and ship owners in Chania and in Crete in general. For the research, important are also the occupations of merchants, fishermen, and workers at the port. These categories of occupation are being examined in the context of the effects of the transition, of this technological transition from sail to steam navigation, which changed the way trade was performed and affected the lives of maritime communities in the second half of the 19th century, but also in the context of the political situation of Crete, which also affected importantly those communities. During the reasons, it became apparent that the port city and its people were influenced by a number of factors that were not only related to this technological transition, but also to broader political and demographic changes on the island. So about the sources, during the time I have been working on my research, on my thesis, I have visited many archives and have seen material in various languages such as Ottoman Turkish, English, French, and Greek. The most important archives are the Ottoman Archive of Chania and the one in Istanbul, the central archive. I have also visited various libraries and archives in Greece and Turkey. So the research is grounded in extensive archival research, focusing primarily on the Ottoman Archive of Chania. Here you see on the right the building. It used to belong to the person of the Jewish community of Chania during the early 20th century. Now it's the building of where the archive of Chania is housed, the historical archive of Crete, actually. This archive was utilized for the first time to such an extent. It contains interesting sources such as private trade registers that include information about merchant transactions, ship routes and captains, custom records that give also information about routes, as well as registers such as urban tax property registers that give information about sailors' houses and merchant houses in the city. In addition, documents from court records, such as the commercial court, give information about the transactions and disputes about among merchants, ship owners, and seafarers. Through the combined use of and cross-examination of both Ottoman and non-Ottoman European sources, the dissertation addresses its research questions using a methodology that incorporates both quantitative and qualitative analysis. However, the available material posed several challenges for the research. Its fragmentary nature made it difficult to draw conclusions over a long time span, as most sources date from the last 3 decades of the 19th century and the early 20th century. Thus, although the study covers the period 1830s, 1918, the evidence mainly concerns the years after the 70s. Moreover, the limited use of such material by other researchers complicated its interpretation. So, about Crete and about Chania, actually, the island of Crete is located in the southeastern part of Greece and was part of the Ottoman Empire from the mid-17th century until 1898. Here you see an old and a new picture of the port of Chania. Nowadays we call it the Venetian port of Chania. The Ottomans conquered the island from the Venetians. The Venetians built this port during the Venetian times, and of course the Ottomans used it for the next centuries until 1898 when they left. The late 19th century was marked by a series of political and economic crises that deeply affected the island. There were many revolts by the Christian communities against the Ottoman state. After 1898, Crete became semi-autonomous with the intervention of what we call the great powers, the European powers, who intervened in its political affairs, and in 1913 it was officially united with the Kingdom of Greece. So Crete is part of Greece for more than 100 years old. In the 19th century, Chania became the capital of Crete with a population around 30,000 people. Nowadays, it's not capital, it's the second biggest city. And back then it was the second biggest city, but an important political and economic center. During the second half of the 19th century, the majority of the population in the island's 3 major cities consisted of Cretan Muslims, while overall Christians made up about 75% of Crete's total population. And this lasted until 1923, when there was this agreement between Greece and Turkey, this exchange of population, when the Muslims from Greece had to leave and the Christian Orthodox from Turkey had to come to Greece, with some exceptions, of course. So about the port of Chania, was an important port, or port city, actually I use mainly the word port city, for the island's exports and imports, especially soap and olive oil, as early as the 18th century. Especially there was a connection with France, with Marseille. They were sending Cretan olive oil for the soap factories of the Marseille. In the 19th century, the port continued to be an export port, which, like the other ports of Crete, communicated extensively with other ports of the Mediterranean, with Eastern Mediterranean, and especially during the semi-autonomous state, early this century, trade with Western and Central Europe increased, as did trade with the Black Sea. Citrus fruit exports were added to these exports, which constituted a significant part of Western Crete's exports in 1869, for example. At the same time, imports to Chania included mainly industrial products and grains, sometimes, as in many other Ottoman ports. Also, in the second half of the century, there was a gradual increase in the number of ships arriving in Chania, combined with the appearance of steamships on the island. This process resulted in steamships outnumbering sailing ships at the beginning of the century, both in Chania and in other ports of the time. These were ships that carried passengers, mail, and general cargo. And above right, you can see the agents of these companies, of these steamship companies, and you see this increase in number from 1881 to 1896. Especially during the 80s, the Ottoman government managed to conclude agreements with foreign companies for the connection of the island with various Mediterranean ports. The growing presence of steamships in the port was due to agreements concluded with foreign and Ottoman companies. The case of the Austrian Lloyd company was a typical example, as it had created a network connecting many Ottoman ports at that time. The connection with Chania, therefore, fits into a broader context and strategy of this company to consolidate and intensify trade relations in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially for the Ottoman state and the state-owned steamship company, Mahsuser. You see probably on the tape on the left, this Ottoman company. The connection with Crete during the years of the island's revolts in the second half of the 19th century also indicated an attempt by the Ottoman government to legitimize its presence on the island. The same we can say also about North Africa. The decline in the number of ships that we see at the beginning of the century is probably related to the sharp decline in the number of sailing ships that replaced steamships. Problems with the port infrastructure, we're going to talk about it, that affected traffic, as well as the turbulent political situation on the island. Foreign sailing ships and steamships connected the city and its port with major centers such as Trieste, Izmir, Smyrna, and Constantinople, while Cretan sailing ships appear to have transported goods to these Ottoman ports and smaller ones. However, upon studying the port city of Chania, I realized that in addition to legal trade, official trade, smuggling also had a significant impact on the economy and the operation of the port due to the policies imposed to combat it. And here is actually the page of our project. The principal investigator is Anna Sidorenko, a researcher at the Institute for Mediterranean Studies. The name of the project is Shadow Trade and Revealing Maritime Smuggling between the Russian and Ottoman empires from the Crimean War until the First World War. And actually, I'm dealing with Crete, even though when we are talking about smuggling, of course, we're not doing research on a specific port, on a specific place. An initial, what interests me is who participated in this illegal trade, which areas they connect the island to, and how they were ultimately treated if this happened. An initial study suggests that smuggling in the area involved a range of goods, from everyday products like olive oil to monopoly products, items such as tobacco, for example, as well as more specific cases. And here I have two cases that I'm starting right now. In addition to illegal transport of these goods that I said, we know that there was also smuggling of people. Even after the slave trade was banned in the middle of the century, our sources show that the trade people, or the smuggling of people, continued with connections from the ports of Libya to Crete. It is interesting here to note that similar routes exist today as refugees and migrants seek safer places to live. So the Libya-Crete connection remains a key sea route. For legal, officially legal. You understand how I mean. The second half of the 19th century in Crete, as in other parts of the empire, was marked also by uprisings, as I said, against Ottoman rule. An example is the involvement of Lloyd Company, and here we have this technology, this transition, and how it affects also illegal trade, which appear to have transported weapons to Crete towards the end of the century, possibly in the context of the revolts taking place on the island. The advent of steamship, therefore, seems to have facilitated the illegal transport of goods and people, as there are numerous documents referring to similar practices in other ports in the southeastern Mediterranean in the second half of the century. And of course, the authorities responded to this problem by conducting inspections of ports and harbors and proposing the addition of guards to combat smuggling. Here is a report that shows this and actually maps all this, refers to all these small bays that are, where the smuggling takes place. And here is a map I have found during my research, a part of a map. It shows the western part of Crete. This blue mark, the big blue mark, is Chania, city of Chania. And the other ones that you see, it's in Ottoman Turkish, but these are small, not cities, small villages, small bays, small coastal cities. I mean, these places are mentioned in this report. So we see that the smugglers are using these small bays. When they don't use the port of Chania, they use other small bays for smuggling. Another topic that I liked a lot and my research focused on was infrastructure projects in Crete, their connection to the arrival of steamship. In this way, we place Crete within the broader context of the southeastern Mediterranean during the Ottoman Empire and the period of Ottoman infrastructural reconstruction, and of course the intervention here of European businessmen and companies. The expansion of trade and the introduction of steamships made the development of port facilities more urgent than ever, sparking discussions among engineers, architects, politicians, and merchants. I focus particularly on the port of Chania and the western part of the island, highlighting the port's structural problems and the growing interest in Souda. Souda, nowadays, it's the main commercial port of Chania, is the one we see on the right. Even from the 19th century, there were discussions that Souda is a natural port, so maybe we should use this as our main port. It's a few kilometers east of Chania. Due to poor infrastructure and harsh winter conditions, the port of Chania often could not accommodate large vessels, which instead sought refuge in Souda. As a result, Souda beyond its military role, because it was a military base and still is actually, also operated as a commercial port in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Public debate on improving port infrastructure was intense, supported by the press and foreign consuls. However, conflicting interests, the turbulent political situation, financial limitations, and the prioritization of military spending prevented the realization of large-scale and lasting infrastructure projects. And these are some case studies, some discussions that we see, some articles or some orders. Another aspect that interests me was the connection between port cities and diseases and their control, and more generally with public health policies. Similar initiatives could be implemented in cities without ports, of course. However, these policies were more prevalent in areas that served as gateways for immigrants, visitors, and sick workers, or where diseases spread via the sea during the transport of people. In this context, the introduction of quarantine in Crete in the 1830s, affected the organization of ports, particularly during its establishment, but also during the periods of crisis such as the 60s, when cholera ravaged the Eastern Mediterranean. And it's interesting because during the 60s, we see some efforts for this, for public health policies. And it's interesting, I have found these documents, such as the one in the middle. These are dispatch of, this is an order for the dispatch of fresh, let's say, vaccines. These are the first vaccines, actually, that we have during the 19th century for smallpox. And they sent them from Istanbul to Crete. And we are writing an article with a friend about that, with a colleague about that, and we're trying to see also how this transportation took place, and probably through steamships. The introduction of these institutions is analyzed in the context of Ottoman history, while an attempt was made to highlight the public health policies implemented in the city during the second half of the 19th century, such as the cleaning of the city with a focus on the port. We have this order on the right, fortunately. At the same time, these policies affected other parts of other people in the city, and activities like also prostitution was connected to this, of course, which was concentrated in Chania in close proximity to port in a dock workers area, and was considered by the local administration to be a threat to public health and morality, but mostly public health. In addition to focusing on the port itself and the places surrounding it, I attempted through my research to see how the policies of this century affected the people themselves who were engaged in professions related to the sea. In the literature, terms such as maritime community have been used to describe these professions, but in Greek, maritime community is translated as naftiki kinotita, which is something like a sailors community. It seems to refer only to the professions of sailors, captains, and ship owners. In my case, I don't use this term. I use the term maritime related or occupations, not so often the term maritime community. I believe that due to the geomorphological characteristics of the island, there was not a large percentage of people, it's a real mountainous island, engaged in these professions. Furthermore, I think that by categorizing all these professions under a common name, I believe that the class differentiation between, for example, a sailor and ship owner or a merchant boatman is lost. The results show that it seems that many of the professions related to the sea were practiced by the Muslims of the island. During the 19th century, as I said before, most of the Muslims in Crete lived in large cities, while the majority of Christians lived in rural areas. This was an outcome of the conflicts between these communities. This differentiation also had an impact on the occupational structure of the two communities. This situation is confirmed by the 1881 census, the one you see in the middle, where approximately 80% of Cretan sailors are listed as members of the Muslim community. Apart from these categories, the Muslims of the city, and specifically the African Muslims, there was an African community of 2,000 or 3,000 people in Chania, who had arrived in early decades of the 19th century, were the main workers in the port of Chania. This observation seems important for how we understand the work of Muslims in Crete, especially in professions related to the sea. While historiography may have emphasized other communities as dominant in these professions, research seems to indicate that Muslims had a significant presence in these sectors in Greece. Beyond counting sailors and identifying the religious diversity, I have attempted to record their areas of residence. Although the information we have is limited, it seems that in the early 20th century, sailors, boatmen, and also fishermen chose to live near the port and the area where they worked. Also, the port workers, who were mainly African Muslims, lived in the eastern part of the city outside the city walls. I was also interested in the business activities that were related to the port of Chania. Based on a combination of various sources, it appears that the Muslims of the city did not own a large number of ships, but mainly sailing ships such as brigs and schooners, similar to those found in other areas of Eastern Mediterranean, although maybe smaller in size. We know also from a study on the island of Syros, an island of Aegean and important maritime center, that some Cretan Muslims from Chania were going there in order to invest in ships or to build their ships there in Greece. It seems that later the investment continued to be made in smaller ships, perhaps reinforced by the deterioration of the situation of Muslims on the island. Late 19th, early 20th century. In several cases, this investment involved shares, as was the case in other areas of the Eastern Mediterranean, especially in short distance trade. In many cases, more than two people owned a ship. Furthermore, the findings of the research show that local entrepreneurs, businessmen, and other cities made some attempts at the end of the 19th century to invest in small steamships that would transport products around the island of Crete to connect the larger ports because there was a problem with the roads, and there was no railroad, so they needed some steamships to go around the island and transfer products. It therefore appears that there was a corresponding investment effort by Christian merchants in the two big cities of Crete, Heraklion, nowadays capital, and Chania, the port city we are studying, with the aim of replacing small sailing ships with steamers. At the same time, we believe that such investment efforts threaten these small owners of ships who traveled around the island to transport goods due to the problematic and inadequate land road network. The research also revealed that there was little shipbuilding activity in Chania, but some Cretan ships were built outside Crete, in other places like Syros, as I said before. Sources like the one you see on the right, this is from a private commercial register of, it seems that it's a timber merchant, and we see his transaction. This is both in Ottoman Turkish and both in Greek. Actually, it's not Ottoman Turkish, just the name is Greek. And we see his transactions with and his cooperation with captains and shipbuilders. So he sells timber to them, probably for shipbuilding or repairs. The fact that steamships are the primary means of transporting goods and people at the end of the century further limited the use of shipyards. Combined with the construction of the waterfront at the end of the century, this led to the conversion of the shipyards into food warehouses, and they continue to be used for this purpose for many years. It is no coincidence that part of them was bombed during the Second World War by the Nazis because there were storage areas, and nowadays still were abandoned, as far as I know, from what I have seen. What also interests me is the labor relations on board and offshore and how they are affected by these changes, general, political, and technological, during this time. Despite the difficulty in locating sources of this subject, some initial conclusions have been drawn. One of the main ones is that it seems that on many Cretan ships that sail to other Ottoman ports, sailors worked on a share basis rather on a salary basis. It seems that in many similar cases, this payment system was maintained and the practice of paying a salary was not adopted, as was the case with sailing ships involved in long distance trade. In fact, even on Cretan ships in the early decades of the 20th century, we see Muslim sailors from Chania being paid on a share basis. 20th century crew lists you see on the right example. This is one of the sources that I have found during the last years of my PhD in Athens. It shows that during the first decade, the end of the first decade, no, second decade of the 20th century, the locals were investing in even smaller ships, and the Christians who invest were more. This, of course, has to do with how, with the fact that, as I said before, the Muslims had lost the economic strength that they had the previous decades. And it's interesting that there are some cases where we have sailors that have come from other areas. They're non-Cretans, and they are paid in shares, which is not the case for the locals. And the other interesting fact is that we see Muslims working together with Christians, mainly on a ship of the latter. And it seems that the relations on the island between the communities were more complex than simply friendly or hostile, words often used to describe intercommunal relations in Crete and elsewhere back then. Of course, I was interested during my research for boatmen and for porters, for the workers of the port. As I said, most of these occupations were the ones involved were the African Muslims, especially the porters. They were locating them in the sources proved difficult. It appears that they appear in the sources when they have done something. And it's interesting to see if this is true, or if it's always the first one to blame. But there are some articles in the newspapers where they blame them for something that they have done, probably related to their work. And a typical example is the one, again, in Greek, but is the example of an African porter who was reported in the local press to have had clashes with the custom office due to a lack of work for that day. Work at the port is an activity that is not easily identified in available sources from the period, which makes it difficult to draw general conclusions, as I said before. However, the data revealed that there was an intense activity by boatmen, port of Chania, linked to the lack of infrastructure in the port, as many large ships were forced to remain outside the port. It's interesting, by the way, to think today. Sometimes today there is a cruise ship that arrives, and if it doesn't go to Souda, which is the main commercial port of Crete, of Western Crete, it comes to Chania, to the Venetian port of Chania, the old port, and it stays outside, and then there are boatmen, actually, nowadays, that they bring the tourists back on shore. So it's something like something that that was happening during the 19th century. The ship outside and the people working for transferring people to the waterfront. We know that these people, the boatmen, most of them own their own boats, as they appear to have sold some of them in documents. And there are, of course, some documents that show these problems that they were facing. This document on the right about the strike in Chania in 1903. They don't say the reason for that. However, there is this document from 1910. These are the boatmen of Chania. They sent to the government, actually, a petition, and they say every time we go to Souda with our boats, we, the boatmen of Chania, we are prevented by the port authority from practicing our profession. We do not know the reason why the port authority, is preventing us from working. We ask to be allowed to work, otherwise we will not be able to earn a living. This suggests that the use of Souda as a supplementary port, as mentioned above, had an impact on the working communities in the port of Chania. So there was an antagonism between these two communities. The last aspect where I focused on my research is the social history of the city, the port city. Again, I'm using this term of port city. I will explain why. Beyond serving as a place for the transport of goods and passengers, the port emerged as a center of entertainment, recreation, and socialization. However, the port area was not limited to the waterfront. For small port cities such as Chania in the 19th century, the port was the core of economic and social activities, as well as the general center of the city. This led to the neighborhoods around the port becoming an integral part of the port itself. That's why I'm using the term port city, because I think that the people that used to live in Chania during the 19th century, they had in their minds that they were living close to the port. The port was important. Nevertheless, the harbor waterfront was an important center of social activity. The increased presence of steamships combined with the city's growing population led to a need for new services such as hotels, for example. In 1870s, there were no hotels in Chania, according to some travelers, but by 1903, there were already 8, some of which were captured in photographs taken at the port at the beginning of the century. Above right, you see again the mosque. This is a mosque that exists still in Chania without minaret, unfortunately, the mosque of Sheikh Hassan from the 17th century. And next to this mosque, you see one of the biggest hotels of the 19th century. Here I have combined some sources, but the basic source is a real estate register of 1889, that provides valuable information about all these places of socialization, all these coffee shops, taverns and cafes. So we see that many of them are located near the port, especially in some specific neighborhoods. I don't have to say the names because you don't know them, but these were neighborhoods where we know that most of these people, sailors, for example, the workers were staying. And we know, of course, that according to sources from the 50s, we know that the coffee houses close to the port were the places where the sailors from Chania were hired. So European-style cafes gradually appeared along the waterfront, turning the area into a popular promenade for the city's elite. Over time, this same area also hosted theatrical performances and sporting events, further enhancing its role as a hub of urban leisure and social interaction. These new entertainment venues coexisted with traditional coffee houses, while entertainment seems to have been based more on class criteria and less on ethnic and religious ones. Finally, in some cases, the waterfront and the port itself were used by the local administration and communities to consolidate power and compete for control of space. One example is the regular celebration of Epiphany. You see a picture on the right, by the Christian community at a time of significant conflict between communities, and despite the fact that the majority of Chania's inhabitants were Muslims. So, in summary, I believe that this research offers an analysis that combines Ottoman European sources, the former of which, despite their limitations, have rarely been used in the past for the study of port. Furthermore, the study highlights important aspects of the history of the port of Chania during the 19th and early 20th century, situating it within the broader processes of transformation that took place in Crete, the Ottoman Empire, and the Mediterranean more generally. At the same time, I believe that through my research, I tried to provide information about short-distance trade, an area about which there's generally little available evidence. I also tried to reveal this participation of Cretan Muslims in shipping. We can say more about each of these topics that I talked about today, later. As these Cretan Muslims in shipping as ship owners and sailors, a reality for which we previously had very limited evidence and references. Finally, the trade in which Cretan ships were engaged also affected working conditions at sea and on land, and this research trying to shed light on these aspects and also the aspects of the everyday life of these social groups. That's why I examined the social history of the port of Chania, combining the study of its economic functioning with its social dimension, a field that few studies have explored. I sought pose and answer questions in ways that would be useful for studying individual ports and port cities, as well as port networks, and the professional groups that operated in and around them. In this context, the port city of Chania was approached not only as a site where goods were loaded and unloaded, but also as a space of work, commercial agreements, social interaction, and the implementation of political decisions by the state administration. In essence, the port of Chania functioned as an important center of the city's economical, social, political, and cultural life, and as a site of coexistence and conflict of interests among various factors, including capital groups and the local administration, political developments on the island, technological advances, transportation changes in the cities, demographics further and intensified the importance of all these dimensions of the port area as the 19th century progressed. Finally, when studying the history of the port of Chania, we cannot help but consider its character today. I told you about that it was built by the Venetians. In the case of Chania, the historic port area has been highlighted as a creation of its Venetian past, ignoring the centuries that followed, as is the case with many other historical areas and monuments also in Greece. Furthermore, the presence and activities of the people there are ignored, as this, as I've tried to show today, and also through my research. In general, the Muslims of Chania were mainly active professions related to the port, if not earlier, then certainly during the later Ottoman years and the period of the Cretan state. Cretan Muslims were mainly sailors, ship owners, and fishermen, while the African Muslims were port workers and boatmen. It is likely that the fact that those who dominated these professions were the others, the Muslims, played a role in their being silenced as part of the port's history. In any case, defining the port of Chania solely as Venetian inevitably obscures and erases, intentionally or not, a large and important part of its history. Thank you very much.
So I have the power today, which is scary. Thank you, Petros. That was really interesting. It gave us a lot of insights. There could be a lot to talk about. So again, I don't know if it's a good idea that I have the power. Yeah, I don't know if there's any. Would you mind stop sharing? Because
Yes, of course.
I don't know if there's questions online or here. If not, I can start.
Let's give preference to people online, maybe. Right.
Most people online are not responsive for the moment.
All yourself.
Okay, I can start. Oof, I have a bunch of questions, so I need to prioritize. Okay. I think this is a good start. So this is again, I guess, more of a clarification, but then can open up a wider discussion. I was wondering about the map you showed us with reference to the smuggling, where we saw at least two big ports and then the other smaller towns. And I was wondering, I might have missed this. Who, if you know, who actually, I lost who produced the map, who was using it? Was it the Ottoman officials controlling the smuggling, or were the smugglers using it for the smuggling? And this, again, can open up a wider discussion about the smuggling in general. Who are the actors involved that you're looking at? Where? What are these? I mean, you did mention a bit more, you did talk a bit more about what they're smuggling, but I wondered if you could say a bit more about the routes that they're taking and who's involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Should I start with that?
No.
Okay. Well, the map was not made for dealing with smuggling. Actually, while I was doing my research, I opened a state central government, actually a local government register, and inside inside this register there was this map. This map probably is from the the register was from the 70s, I think 70s. But we are not sure. I mean, who made it? I mean, there's no. Probably maybe there's a later someone later made it and put it in there. I mean, well, we cannot be sure. And in general, there is a big problem about the Ottoman archive in Chania. I mean, a part of it is in a very bad shape. So I found this map inside, and because in this map we see each bay, each small harbor, and then I saw this report, where in this report, the person that wrote this report was in charge of reforming actually the custom houses and reforming actually the policy of the state, also against smuggling. So he mentions many small bays, many small harbors, and I wanted to show you these small harbors and bays. That's why I put this map there, because the one that made this map, he wanted to write down these places. So I'm not saying that the map is connected to smuggling, no. But yeah, we have all these coastal areas who were, I mean, small villages, or maybe not even a village, and we have them on map. That's why I'm trying to show how many small bays and this kind of areas exist in Crete. And about smuggling in general, and the actors and where, I said about this connection with North Africa. We know that Crete was included in slave trade. I mean, before it was forbidden. So we know that from North Africa, actually from Sub-Sahara, there was a route that was taking people to the ports of Libya and then to Crete. Some of them were sold in other important ports of Ottoman Empire, Izmir or Istanbul. Some of them were staying in Crete. I mean, we have, as I said, we had a big African community. Crete. Some travelers say even 3,000 people. So this was a route that existed after. There is this communication between the consuls, and we see the consuls of Libya saying that, okay, there were some smugglers from Libya that sent some slaves, probably their slaves, to Crete. And then they say that the authorities in Crete, the port authorities, must try to see what's going on. And then they criticize the authorities in Crete, and they say that they're not doing it right, properly. So it's interesting to see who is involved in this. In some cases, they also accuse the boatmen. I mean, the laws against illegal trade, they are very strict towards the boatmen, who can, get closer to a steamship, for example. And so, yeah, I guess that there were many people, among them some people working at the port. Yeah, so far it's actually in the beginning of this research. So far,
No, thank you. That's really interesting. Yes, Lino. Oh no, Nancy.
Thank you so much for this great presentation, Petros. So I have two questions. One is just a more empirical question in the sources, because when you say fishermen, and at this particular period of time in Ottoman term, this could actually mean a number of things. So in the sources, does it say balıkçı? And is it, I mean, because the fisherman could be the ship captain, it could also be the there are different roles on the boat, and so I was actually just curious about that because it's actually kind of a broad term. Sailor, also a broad term, and both of them kind of the sailor could be the rower. The sailor could also be the fisherman. who was fishing, but then the fisherman could actually be the ship captain. So I was just wondering if the sources offer any clarity on that. So just a bit of a pedantic question. My apologies. And then the other question I had was actually about gender. Because I was thinking in particular in terms of Lucia's work, which I know Ada is having us see her later in the year.
Mhm.
That one thing one of the anxieties, one of the central anxieties happening with the rise of these port cities at this time, and particularly Thessaloniki or Salonika, and then certainly in Port Said, is the import of European women as sex workers. This was why the British were so impassioned about abolition in the Mediterranean port. It wasn't that they weren't even primarily concerned about male enslaved labor. They were actually concerned about women as sex workers and the risks of disease, which you mentioned, and all this stuff. So I think the disease slides kind of just got me thinking about that. I mean, how does the sex work issue, if at all, bear out in the sources regarding Ottoman Chania?
Yeah, thank you very much for your questions, and Ada before and you now. Very interesting. So about the sources, so in the first official census of 1881, we don't have a mention. We don't have any mention fishermen, as far as I remember. They're just sailors. So probably fishermen were, as you said, they were doing also this. Of course, we know also that sailors were also ship owners. I mean, probably they had shares. So, I mean, they could be captain or just a sailor or actually ship owner. And also they could be fishermen. During the early 20th century, we have again a census where for the first time we have separate category fishermen. This is during the Greek state, the Cretan state, so it's in Greek and they say fishermen, so it's separate. But I know from the Greek case that I think from the end, really end of the 19th century, we have this, for the first time, this fisherman and the sailor, for the first time, this separation. I have a friend that he's working on this, he's doing his PhD on sailors and labor, sailors and labor, and he's trying to find out what's going on with this occupation during the 19th century. So we had some discussions, and he has seen that this during the late 19th century, this separation. But in Crete, we see that during the early 20th century, and it's in Greek. So yeah, they say Psaras, Alice, actually it's the Greek word, the older one. Yes. So, and about the gender, yes, of course, I have seen the work of Lucia that you said, and about Port Said, and very, very interesting work. Yes, I mean, we know that during the early 20th century, during the semi-autonomous state, it's a period when the foreign powers, they send troops in Crete. So there are some troops there. And with the troops, there are some people that they write that there are also women that they arrive in Crete to work as sex workers. So during that time, there are some people that they say that they are 500 sex workers. We are not sure about this number, of course, but we have other sources that show that these women have arrived in this port city of early 20th century. And actually, it's an interesting case. 1901, there is an interesting case in the newspaper. It's the front page for some weeks, actually. There is a case study when a doctor in Chania, he actually said he was lying to some women about, he was telling that, you have some problems, you have a disease, you can come to my place and I will give you a medicine. He was doing that, and probably the women didn't have anything, or probably they had, but he wanted to get, to extract some money from them. So we have this case in the court, and we have their confession, we have their talks on the newspaper, and most of them are women they say I came last year from another port city. I was not staying here. It's my first year, and this guy tried to do that to me, and he lied to me, and he took money from me. So we know that they arrived and they were living and working in Chania. I don't know if I responded to your questions, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have a question which keeps us in the topic of slavery, but then back to Africa. And it's not a question, it's an introduction to a question. So we have the pleasure of having with us Henry Lovejoy from Boulder, Colorado, who is, among other digital humanities project, the curator, I think, of the website Liberated Africans, and one of the things that they have in this website is slaves going from Tripoli to Crete. So Henry, I don't know if you wanted to say something about that or something else.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my question, I loved your talk. I think it's interesting to see this transformation of Crete, because when we're looking at the global abolition of slavery, what we're finding is really not liberation per se, right? We're talking about the indenturing of Africans, at least by European law. So when we talk about the famines in the Ottoman Empire, I think in 1856, that liberated these people, I think the case you're mentioning involved, about 50 people or so who were taken to Crete. So one question is what happened to the enslaved people? Did they end up in Ottoman courts? Were they re-enslaved, taken elsewhere, which was a very common trend throughout the world. The second question I have for you relates to passports. When do passports sort of start entering into the picture? Because in certain ways, the slave trade continues through children, through women, which I think another member of this talk was talking about, sort of using marriage as a way in which to sort of hide different types of slavery. So, you're traveling with your wives if it's a polygamous situation. And so I'm just sort of wondering how passports sort of begin to come into this equation in these social transformations.
Thank you very much for your questions. It's very interesting. So actually, as I said, I have just started this work on illegal trade, on slave trade, legal trade, actually in general, and I have found some case studies. I'm working on them. In most of the cases, it's difficult to follow. I mean, from what I've seen so far is actually some online sources, this correspondence of the British consulates. So, I mean, my next plan is to go to London to see go to England to see the documents there. I mean, to learn more about this topic, and also try to locate also the French archives. I have seen some of them for my PhD, but not, I was not focused on illegal trade. So in some cases, it's difficult to follow its case. What we see sometimes is, as I said, this disagreement between the authorities in Libya and the authorities in Crete about the fact that probably they're not legal. They're not illegal. They're slaves, and their documents are fake. So this is actually a discussion that is being done. There are cases that they let them go, they let them continue their trip, and they say we couldn't do anything. There are other cases that they say that this is a problem. Probably they have to go to the court. I'm trying to see about the cases that I sent here, but I remember that in one case left them go, or there was another case where they seized the ship and they caught them there. But we don't know what happened later. We don't have another document that talks again about this case. But we have, for example, an arrest of someone who was transporting people from Africa, from North Africa to Crete. So I mean, I'm trying to say that in the beginning. So I haven't seen many cases. I know that in some cases they say that we check their documents, they're fine, so we leave them, even though we were thinking that maybe they're not. In many other cases, they say that you should have not let them go, but you did. And there are the cases that they arrest them. They arrest actually the owner of the ship, the captain actually. We don't know who is the owner. And about the passports, so far I haven't. I mean, I know this. There was a latest research and a book about the passports in the Ottoman Empire. This book by Guy Yilmaz, which is a very interesting work about. I mean, the first work that we have about passports, just about this topic, and about how during the 19th century the Ottoman authorities tried to control actually the mobility of people, and he actually tries to make this connection with the political situation in the Ottoman Empire, the people that used to rebel the threats towards the administration. In the case of Crete, I haven't seen any document yet about mentioning the passports. I haven't, fortunately. But as I said, in the beginning, but I'm pretty sure that, you're right to mention that. I'm pretty sure that it's very important to see how it affected mobility also in Crete. Yeah.
And can I just follow up quickly? So I think it's a very, I'm more of a West African historian, Atlantic world, but my research on global abolition drew me into the Mediterranean because of these false systems of liberation in heavy quotation marks, which really meant indentures. So all of the Asians, Chinese who ended up, Southeast Asians who ended up in the Americas building railroads, this is all part of the abolition scheme. And so the British materials, yes, in French in the consular offices, you can find most of those materials online through the archives, through the FO84 series. So you may not even need to go to London to do that unless you want to, which is great. But if you want sort of quicker access, you can get those through the FO84 series. I think Toledano wrote about this, and so you can chase his footnotes. And then the parliamentary papers are also online through the Center of Research Libraries, which I think you showed an image of that one in particular. But
yes,
I
found some of.
Yeah. So you can find the original FO documents and then there. But my understanding is that sort of the consular offices were sort of overseeing these processes, and then they really then they end up in Ottoman courts. And so I think you're going to find more or less about them, these people, if you're interested in what happened to them through those sources. I don't read Turkish or Arabic, so I think this is where my limitations sort of end. I'm very curious what those primary sources would say, if they still exist. I know local Ottoman courts could be very sparse in documentation depending on areas. So I don't know where those might end up. You might have an idea. So I guess my question is, where would those sources be?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's very helpful. All of this that you say, they're very helpful for my research. And yeah, actually, it's interesting the fact that what is going on during the 19th century with the court system in the Ottoman Empire in general, and also in the provinces. I mean, we have new courts, new courts during the 19th century. We have actually the commercial court, which is founded during the mid 19th century. We have some branches, we have some commercial courts at Izmir, at Thessaloniki, at Crete, at Chania. There are also the Qadi courts, the Muslim courts that we had from the previous centuries, where we had almost every case there that had to do with anything, if the person was able to go there, was able to afford what he needs to go there. And also we have this mixed, this Nizamiye mixed courts of the 19th century that have many different cases there. And for the first time, the Qadi court, the Muslim court in the 19th century, is restricted only to marriages, something that has to do with family. So in Crete, there are these documents for the 19th century. They have many problems, but for example, we have 4 registers of the commercial court. After the 70s, unfortunately, not before. I have seen most of them for my PhD, and I mean, they're not mentioned, this kind of deals, but probably the mixed courts. I don't think the Qadi courts, the courts of the Muslim, but probably the mixed courts, we have also a part of them in Crete. Probably they have information about this topic, probably. Yes, I don't know, but yeah, very interesting. They have survived in index set. Yeah. In some cases you have an index with the main person, the main people involved, the type of the case in Ottoman Turkish for this, and the date, and then you can go and find this whole case, or in some other cases you cannot find it, so you have just the index. So you just have the name and the type of the case. I mean, what happened, what was the accusation, something like that. This is the problem with this kind of documents, fortunately. But yes, probably I can find there something. Yeah.
Because I'm sure the case files are within those records, because I think the British consuls or the French consuls, they hand over the cases to the Qadi, and then that's where they sort of determine what the fate of these people are, which probably ended up with the same owners on the promise that they would be liberated and served to indenture for whatever amount of years. But this wasn't specific to Ottoman law. But there's certainly the pressure of sort of Europeans to do this at this point. So I mean, I find this very interesting, that particular moment, but that's just from my own research. So it's interesting to hear your perspective for sure. Thank you.
I think Nancy has another.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment to this discussion, just because I do think, I don't know if this is a corrective or what, but as somebody who also does question of free labor, so-called free labor, and abolition in the Mediterranean, I think one thing I do notice in studies that either are I mean, I think it's an issue of training, scholarship that is focused on the perspective from the African continent. One other thing that's missed is that the injunction to abolish slavery itself becomes a mode of British imperial rule in the Mediterranean. Like that injunction, that moral injunction itself becomes a form of neocolonialism, ironically, in the Mediterranean. And one of the ways this manifests is that the Ottoman Empire, I mean, the Tanzimat reforms being one part of this, but the Ottoman Empire was very stressed about not wanting to be perceived as enslavers, right? And so the way, I mean, to go back to the source question, which Petros addressed, I think one of the things that is evidence of this is that it's not just British cases being brought to Ottoman or Muslim courts. The Ottomans are also trying to manage the migration of these laborers, right? So, I mean, I don't know. An example would be the paper I gave last year. The Ottoman state, this kidnapped child from and it's obviously trying to, the captain who kidnapped him was obviously going to use him as sort of either de facto enslaved labor or actually enslaved labor in the Aegean. But the Ottoman state is the one that intervenes and says, no, we have to return this child back to Tripolitania. And so the state itself is actually trying to manage what is actually a very difficult to manage situation, because a lot of these slaves are being transported through, I mean, as you know, through Tripoli largely, from the Sudan, by smugglers, and so it's just very difficult to. But yeah, I just want to give the not to be an Ottoman idealist, but the Ottoman state actually, is feeling very much pressured to address this issue. So, yeah.
Paulino has a question.
I have. Thank you very much, first of all, Petros, for your talk and for coming online to the DIGMED seminar. So this was very, very much appreciated. I have 3 maybe methodological questions, all of them very brief. Also because there is people here writing their dissertations and they need to know what kind of history they want to write and kind of person they want to be. So, the first one is, Ada mentioned that usually we have seminars on science and technology. If you look at our seminars, there are many on politics, directly on politics, but it's true that most of them, not all of them, most of them try to engage with what we engage here in DeepMed, which is the submarine Mediterranean. And you don't need to do that at all, but I'm curious. If you were forced, like in a room, you don't get out until you find the connection, would you be able to point to something? That's the first methodological question. Second, I'm sort of a historian of technology, and I like this idea of the shock of the old. I read another paper of yours that you haven't mentioned much here. It's a chapter published in Mediterranean Seafarers in Transition, and it's very cool because it's kind of the story that you told us today, but together with the transition from sail to steam. But you also told us today that, for instance, in some occasions you had large boats anchoring outside of the port, and then boatmen going to pick up either commodities or people. And I'm sure those were not using steam. They were using either sails or rowing. So the shock of the old thesis is about how new technologies, there is never a transition, a shift. There is a transition, of course, but there is not a shift from one technology to the next one. There is a coexistence, and there is a reconfiguration. So I'm very curious about how the steamship affected sail in a place like Crete, where you also mentioned more in your chapter than today, but also today, that connections between the ports in the same island were common because road infrastructure was not very developed. So you needed to connect was that done by steamship or by sail? And then the third methodological question would be something like, where is the people? So I didn't see lots of proper names of people, of individuals in your presentation, but that might be because you don't need them, or that might be because you don't find them. Yeah, maybe they are not in the sources. Maybe if you are doing a social history of labor, for instance, you don't find lots of individuals, or they are just too many to be mentioned, and there is not one that matters. So where is individual agency in this story? That would be another way of putting it. I'm sorry if those questions are too broad. You can do whatever you want with them. Thank you.
Okay, I will start with the second one, what you said about this transition or coexistence, which is really interesting. Yes, actually, when we say transition, we don't mean that we mean that during a period there is a coexistence, and I mean I think that the small ships, the small sailing ships, never stopped to exist. Even during the first decades of the 20th century, for what we know, that has to do in general with Eastern Mediterranean. It has to do with the island, with the geomorphology of the island. We have this appearance, this arrival of steamships during the 19th century that affects many aspects of the life of the port and of its people. Because this port was made from the Venetians some centuries ago, it was not able, the steamships, the big ships, were not able to enter, as we said. So yes, there were small boats that they were going outside and they were, carrying the products and the people back, and actually we know from secondary literature, from the consuls, from the discussions, actually, we know that these boatmen didn't want didn't want infrastructure works. They didn't want projects. They didn't want the port to change, to become a better port, because in this way they could work in the way that they were working. So yes, and at the same time, of course, there were sailing ships that they were still operating, but I think that they stopped doing some. They changed their routes. They were affected by this regular connection of the steamships with Crete, because these big steamships, they were carrying people, they were transferring products and mail, so it was something new. It also affected the transportation of goods around the island. This is I think very interesting. We know that small sailing ships were transferring products around the island because the road system was really bad. The consuls during the 19th century, they said all the time there is a big problem with this, and actually there were efforts for a railroad system. There were discussions, there were plans that were suggested, but eventually there was no railroad. So during the 1890s, we have these small steamships to replace these small sailing ships in this route. So I think it was affected. It was affected, but it did not replace it. It replaced it actually, but it not. I think that it restricted its. It restricted the routes, so they had to change the routes. The locals had to invest in even smaller ships. Yeah, I don't know if I respond to that.
Yes.
But okay. Yeah. But I agree with you. But I agree with you that there is this coexistence. Of course, I agree with what you said about where are the people that you ask. Yes, because I tried to talk about lots of things, but just to present you in a more general way, I did not focus on some case studies. Of course, the people are there. People are there in the court registers. We have the name of the people, the sailor that goes to the court, and we have some protagonists. They're not protagonists in my thesis. There's not a person that I find him in the documents. However, there are some ship owners, for example, that if we see their names also in this real estate register that I showed before. So these ship owners, for example, we know from other sources that they have ships, and at the same time we know that they have like 3 or 4 houses in Chania in different neighborhoods. So we can trace. I have tried to do that. I didn't do that today, but I have tried to locate some people that are protagonists. And
Thank you. I'm sorry because we have a camera which is an intelligent camera, and now it tends to discriminate against my voice.
Because it's an intelligent camera.
It's very intelligent. So I was nodding and saying thank you and so on. Yeah, so it's very
okay. Yes. And
so
about
thanks
the
for your
seminar,
answer.
about the seminar that you asked. Yes,
Please
I
go
mean
ahead.
I haven't searched this topic. Yeah, I mean about how did the Ottomans. We have some researches about how the Ottomans started, doing research about the sea, about the ocean. We have some researches about the telegraph. We have this kind of information, but I haven't done any research on that.
Cool. Thank you. But maybe that information would be interesting for somebody like Ada.
Me and Petros will talk more about this for sure.
Nice.
I have another question that I was gonna ask, but I don't know if we're pressed with time or especially if there's others who haven't asked anything and are and want to do that, they should be prioritized. Okay, last question, loaded one. And I mean, I guess because you said that you're at the beginning of this, so it might need time to investigate, but just to make sure that that's something that you guys you're looking at. You said at the very, very end of your presentation that that in the sort of late Ottoman period, you can see, well, you don't really know if it's a shift or a situation that is there about the Muslim population and regarding Muslim and class and their economic stature and the fact that these are ship owners. And I'm trying to figure out if you are connecting this to the emergence of steam, and if so, if you think that there's a shift in these sort of socioeconomic status of the Muslim community because of the technology, or if this was the case in Chania before as well, where you have the Muslim community being the sort of the economic elite, or again, however you want to categorize them. So yes, I guess because what I like about your work is that it points the finger to the topic of race in the Mediterranean, and you're connecting race to sort of technology and sort of modernity and globalization. So I was wondering if that's a connection that you're making, or I'm just seeing things.
Yes. I agree with what you said, and also I was trying to pose that. However, I think that this transition actually was one of the factors that affected the lives, because first of all, not all the Muslims of Chania or of Crete were sailors. I mean, they were doing other occupations. So I mean, but that's why I was saying that there was a combination of factors that affected their fate. It was the political situation, the demographics, I mean, various situations that affected their presence and their economic activities. And I think that the emergence of the steamship was one among these factors, because in general, the Muslim community was a big community. There were many people before they had to leave, and they were doing many other occupations. So the political situation in Crete, it was the first thing that affected. The fact that they lost some of their rights, they lost their connection, some of them, their connection with the government, and the fact they had to leave, some of them had to leave, some of them had to lose their jobs. So, and the job was not always connected to it, but this was also a factor that affected. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we're okay. I don't like the power, but yes, thank you very much. I think we're done. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hope to
was very
see you
helpful
in
also.
person eventually.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And thank you for everybody who came and logged in and participated. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you again. Take care.
Bye bye.